Two young campers encounter a woman crawling on all fours, whispering to herself in the woods at night. A terrifying bear attack becomes the inspiration for a horror movie. Mimics UFOs and Sasquatch. These are terrifying camping encounters that made people run from the woods. In 2019, hikers on the Appalachian Trail started warning each other about a guy who called himself Sovereign. People hiking through Tennessee and Virginia kept reporting the same thing. The guy was acting completely unhinged. He'd scream at campers while wandering through campsites armed with a long blade. Hikers were so alarmed they started sharing warnings about him online. Then on May 10th, a group of 4 hikers ran into him in Virginia. He was walking around playing guitar and singing, but witnesses said he seemed unstable. Later that night, the group set up camp, probably thinking the encounter was over, but it wasn't. The man came back to their campsite in the dark and started threatening them through the tents. At one point, he threatened to pour gasoline on the tents and burn everyone alive, and that's when the group decided, well, it was time to go. They started hurriedly packing up their gear in complete darkness, knowing full well this guy was skulking around nearby in the woods. 2 hikers managed to run off, but he chased after the others. Ronald Sanchez Jr., an Army veteran, was attacked. Sadly, he didn't survive. Another hiker narrowly survived by playing dead. She waited until Sovereign walked away looking for his dog, then ran through the woods until she found help. The man was arrested. Turned out his real name was James Jordan. What makes this story so frustrating, though, is that people had already warned authorities about him weeks earlier, but nothing was done until it was too late. This next story comes from Reddit user KMIA Official, who writes, "When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night my friend and I would walk through the woods. We called this the ritual. This particular night we decided to walk further into the woods than usual. We had flashlights, but we like to try and navigate through the woods with them turned off. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Obviously we hit the flashlights and spun around, didn't see anything. So we kept walking, and then we heard it again. This time we stopped and looked around a bit before we decided to head back to our campsite. Then we see what's whispering. It's a lady crawling on the ground, whispering random words. She was wearing dark clothes and was covered in dirt. When she sees that we notice her, she stands up and declares that she's looking for her campsite. We ended up walking her back to the campsite and tried helping her find her group. Turns out she was just super intoxicated and got lost trying to find a bathroom. Her friends didn't even notice she was missing, and if we didn't go that far into the woods, she probably would have been lost all night. It was pretty creepy. If you've ever seen the movie Backcountry, the reason it feels so disturbing is because it was actually inspired by a real case in Ontario, Canada. Back in September 2005, Jacqueline Perry and Mark Jordan were camping in Missinaba Lake Provincial Park during a 2-week outdoor trip. Mark was an experienced outdoorsman, and Jacqueline was a doctor who also loved camping and kayaking. By all accounts, this was supposed to be a relaxing getaway. Not long into their trip, they were preparing dinner when, out of nowhere, a black bear entered their campsite and went straight for Jacqueline. Mark immediately jumped in to try and pull the bear away from her. At one point, he was fighting the animal with nothing but a small Swiss Army blade. Even after suffering horrific injuries himself, Mark managed to get Jacqueline onto their kayak and paddle through the wilderness searching for help while the wounded bear continued following them through the forest. Eventually, they reached another campsite where nearby campers flagged down a passing boat carrying a doctor, thankfully, and an off-duty police officer. But despite everything Mark did to save her, Jacqueline didn't survive the attack. Mark needed around 300 stitches. Now, fatal black bear attacks in Canada are pretty rare. It was even stranger because wildlife experts would later say the bear was not defending itself. This was predatory behavior. Again, extremely rare for black bears in Ontario. Reddit user Bionic Gimster was backpacking deep in the woods with his dog. He said they were camped around 12 miles from the nearest road or trailhead, so even though the area was somewhat popular with hikers, he didn't see another person all day. Well, around 2 a.m., his dog suddenly woke him up with a deep growl. The uploader turned on his headlamp and saw his dog baring its teeth while staring toward the outside of the tent. A few seconds later, he heard heavy footsteps nearby. First, he figured it was probably a black bear or maybe a moose wandering through the camp, but the footsteps didn't leave. He said whatever it was kept slowly circling the tent. And the weird part was, all of his food was hanging in a bear bag away from camp, so there shouldn't have been anything attracting an animal. He clapped his hands to try and scare the thing off, but the thing just kept circling circling his sight. Eventually, he grabbed his dog's leash and stepped outside holding bear spray, yelling, "Hey bear!" The footsteps immediately stopped. His dog kept staring off into the woods, clearly focused on whatever was out there. The Redditor couldn't see anything in the beam of his headlamp. After waiting a few minutes, he got back into the tent. Sure enough, the circling started up again. This went on for about an hour before the footsteps finally wandered off. The next morning, he checked around camp for tracks. He found trampled leaves circling his tent, no animal prints. Instead, he spotted a few barefoot human footprints nearby. There was also a gift for him in the form of number 2 and toilet paper. So some weirdo was out in the middle of nowhere circling his tent in the wee hours of the morning barefoot and then decided to take a crap. Weird, terrifying, and gross, all wrapped into one. This next story comes from Reddit user Lazy Couch Days, who was around 8 or 9 years old at the time. Her family regularly camped at the same small campground a couple hours from their hometown. On this particular trip, they were also watching her aunt and uncle's 2 dogs. According to the Redditor, the dogs were calm, friendly, and extremely well trained. But during the first night of the trip, around 1 a.m., one of the dogs suddenly started growling inside the tent. Her mother immediately assumed something was outside and armed herself before going to investigate with both dogs beside her. Both dogs got into defensive positions and stared and started forcing her backward toward the car while staying between the tent and the darkness beyond the campsite. By this point, all the kids were awake and kind of panicking inside the tent. The mother decided to pack everything up and get them the hell out of there. And thankfully she did. Because about 10 minutes after leaving the campground, another car appeared behind them. The dog sat in the back seat, growling at the car the entire drive home while the kids cried in panic. Was the car following them? Well, it seemed like it, especially when they finally reached the bridge leading into town. The car followed them the entire way, but the moment they started crossing the bridge into town, it suddenly turned around and sped back toward the campground. The dogs were worked up for a while. When the family stopped at a gas station, one of them refused to let the uploader's mother back near the car until he could clearly see who she was. This next story comes from a now deleted Reddit user who commenters say may have encountered a mimic in the woods. It goes as follows. I was on a student exchange program in the US, specifically New Mexico. I'm not from the US, by the way. Near the end of my stay, my host family, the dad, mom, me, and their 2 daughters decided to go camping. When it was getting dark, 16-year-old me and the 2 daughters decided to go climb a tree a bit away from the campsite. And when we reached the top of a tree, we stopped dead in our tracks because of a sound I will never forget. It sounded like the youngest daughter calling my name, but the thing was, she was sitting just below me, not saying a word. And I have a typical Dutch name, so it's not something some New Mexico local would just shout since they'd have trouble pronouncing it. We sat there as this thing, whatever it was, kept shouting my name in her voice for what felt like an eternity. It was probably around 5 minutes though. When it finally stopped, we bolted back to the campsite where the mom and dad were just sitting enjoying the evening. When we told them about the voice, the dad's face suddenly went pale as a ghost, and he immediately told us to grab our things because we were leaving. 5 minutes later, we were gone. To this day, I still have no idea what the F that was. Dad never wanted to talk about it. One of the weirdest camping stories ever came out of the Allagash Wilderness in Maine back in 1976. 4 friends, twin brothers Jack and Jim Wayner, along with their friends Chuck Rack and Charlie Foltz, headed deep into the woods for a fishing and camping trip near Eagle Lake. One night they spotted this bright object hovering above the trees before it suddenly disappeared. They thought it was strange, but didn't obsess over it and just continued on with their trip. A few nights later, the group was out fishing in a canoe after dark when the light came back. This time, it was way closer. According to the men, the object hovered over the lake, moving in weird ways that made it obvious this wasn't a plane. One of the men used his flashlight to make an SOS signal at the thing, and that's when the light started moving toward them. The guys panicked and started paddling back toward camp as fast as they could, and then suddenly they were back on shore. Only none of them actually remembered getting there. The campfire they'd left behind had burned down almost completely, even though barely any time had passed. Somehow, hours were just gone. Nobody could explain it. Years later, the story got even stranger when the men started talking about nightmares and flashbacks connected to that night, and under hypnosis, separately by the way, each man's memories started coming back, and each one of them remembered being taken aboard some kind of craft and examined on by strange beings. The case became famous after appearing on Unsolved Mysteries, and to this day, it's one of the most well-documented alien abduction cases in history. And this final story comes from a Reddit user named Aquaristan. Something happened during a 2018 camping trip in the North Georgia mountains that completely changed his opinion on Bigfoot. The Redditor and a friend had gone camping in the Upper Chattahoochee Wildlife Management Area, a remote wilderness area that already had a reputation for strange sightings, but they weren't there hunting for cryptids or anything like that. They just wanted to camp near the river and explore the woods. After hiking about a mile, they settled in for the night. Everything was fine and dandy until a huge branch suddenly came crashing down into their campsite near the fire. The Redditor said it looked like the branch had actually been thrown from above because it smashed through other limbs on the way down. When both men turned toward the trees, they saw something standing roughly 20 feet away in the glow of the fire. At first they thought it was just some strange man standing in the woods. The figure looked around 6 or 7 feet tall with long hair, a beard, and what they assumed was a thick jacket, but when they shouted at it, the thing turned and ran into the darkness, and that's when they realized how strange it actually looked. The Redditor described it as thin but with unusually huge arms and legs. Instead of running normally, it moved with a strange loping motion and made what he described as a deep whooshing grunt. He also realized the jacket wasn't actually a jacket at all. It was a dirty fur covering its body. Moments later, both men noticed a horrible rancid smell lingering around the campsite. Completely panicked, they grabbed what gear they could carry, put out the fire, and rushed back to their car in the middle of the night. The next morning, they returned only long enough to collect the rest of their things before racing home. What a creepy story. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.